right, guys, so this is the before coilovers. This is the right height. So it definitely could use a little bit more drop. I'm gonna go ahead and pull it into the garage. Let's get the process started. So now that the wheels are off, we're gonna do two things. One, we're gonna take off the pinch bolt, which is this guy right here. You can kind of see it in frame. This guy right here. We're gonna loosen that. And then of course we're gonna loosen the 3 bolts holding the actual strut assembly in place. Now once we get rid of the pinch bolt, we should be able to just push down this assembly and then the strut should slide out. In addition to that, we need to unbolt the sway bar end link so that this whole system can come out. And you are actually only going to be using 2 sizes here in order to take them off. So I have impact sockets. You're going to use the 14 on the sway bar end link and also on these guys up top. And then for the pinch bolt, you are going to be using a 17. So this guy fits in back here, as you can see. And then we're just going to hit that with the pry bar and get it to come loose. So let me go ahead and get those undone, and then we'll move on to the next step. And just like that, we're out. So it took about 30 seconds. From there, we are going to go ahead and remove these guys. And of course, in doing so, let me just get the bit here. In doing so, it'll actually cause this whole strut assembly to drop. Just be careful with it. If you're going to do it like I am, make sure that you put the camera on a mount, which I will do here in a second. And we want to just ensure that this whole assembly comes out safely. So let me go ahead and put you guys in the mount real quick, and we'll pull the rest of this out. All right, guys, so here on the rears, first thing that we're gonna do is we are going to take this bolt off right here. It is the spring cup. Basically, it holds that spring into place. Once we detach this should be able to move out of the way. We can remove the spring, but more importantly, we have access to the bolt right here that holds the strut in place, okay? Now, once we do that, there are 2 bolts up there. Sorry, it's a little bit grainy, it's kind of dark. We got to take those out, and then the whole strut assembly and the spring assembly come out, and then we can install the new ones. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and crack those open and get them taken off camera, and then I'll come back to you guys. All right, so the 14 mil that is down here came out fairly easy. Just a top tip, make sure that you support this little spring cup right here. If you don't, it's gonna make getting this bolt almost impossible, or even you could even cross thread these just because there's a lot of tension being put onto the cup by the spring. So as you're pulling that thread out, or the bolt out, the thread could, like I said, start to cross thread backwards into the metal. So just support it. When you do that, this actually comes out nice and easy. Again, it's a 14 millimeter. Take that off, and then we're gonna go ahead and lower the jack down, and then this should just swing out of the way. And real quick too, I know it's gonna be really hard to see, so I apologize. But right here, there is a 12 millimeter bolt that holds on the rear sway bar. We're just gonna unbolt that. And like I said before, this does actually drop down. Now, if you wanted to, you could actually wrestle and fight with this to try to pull the spring out, but there's just too much tension here. It's so much easier just to grab a 12 millimeter, crack that, pull it out, and then just pull everything out. So let me go ahead and undo that. Again, I have my 12 in my breaker bar, and we're gonna pull that off. All right, guys, the rear spring is out, passenger side. I'm gonna go ahead and get the driver's side pulled out. I'm gonna do that off camera, and then we're gonna go ahead and set the old stuff next to the new stuff, get it all measured, and then install it back in the vehicle. So now that we have the springs out, we need to take the strut out. So from the back side here, I gotta put my little headlamp on. From the back side here, you do have one more bolt right here. And that bolt make sure I get the right size here. And that bolt is going to be a 17 mil, just like before. 17 mil, it connects right here. We're just going to crack it loose. And then once we do that, we have 1 and 2 bolts up there. So I actually have an extension. It's a 1/2-inch drive extension that's gonna help me reach up there. I'm gonna connect it to my impact gun, and we're just gonna torque them off. And we're gonna do that on each side. So let's start right here with this guy and take it off. So I'm gonna set you guys up on the small tripod, and we're gonna go at this one. Set that off to the side. From there, you can see there's a little lip here that you can go ahead and put the strut on. It just connects back up, so it is easy to put it all back together. Now I'm gonna leave it connected to that. I'm gonna go ahead and go from up top, and we're gonna get those bolts out. We're just gonna crack it enough to take it off by hand, because there's a huge extension all the way down to my gun. But now that it's cracked loose, we are going to separate this, and then we can do it by hand. All right, guys, I was able to get those 2 bolts out. They are 12s, and you're just gonna basically unscrew them from the top, and they will come out. Now from there, we're gonna just slide this off of the perch that it was on, and the shock will drop down like so. And that's that. Okay, now we are gonna be retaining this top piece, and it's gonna go mounted onto our new shock. All right, guys, the next part of the process is we need to take this top hat off of the stock strut. We need to move it over to the new one. Now, there's a couple ways that you can do this. If you guys saw my previous video of the install of these lowering springs, if you have some sort of wrench and an Allen key, you can crack the two. To be honest, it's a little bit difficult. I did use my gun to crack the nut just a little bit, and now I'm going through the process of removing the nut, still using these two right here. So let me go ahead and get this off, and I'll show you guys what it looks like. Okay, so this is coming off. And Now it's off. So you've got your billow, your little top piece, and then your strut individually. All right, so fast forward. What I did was I cut the bump stop and mounted it directly to that. And now it fits. I mean, I don't know if that's intended like that. There was no instruction, but everything does fit and tighten down. So I am gonna go ahead and get this shock in, see if we can get the ride height dialed in. So now that we have the jack supporting it, of course, you guys just saw me put one of these nuts in place. We are going to make sure that all of them are finger tight, and then we can go ahead and lower the jack. Now with this particular strut assembly, I went ahead and adjusted the camber to fit accordingly. Now from there, only thing that you need to do is reinstall your end link, put the nut on, and then you need to put your pinch bolt back in, which goes right here where my finger's at. So just make sure that's in place. Tighten everything down to the required torque, and you're done. Let me go ahead and show you guys how to do the rear. All right, guys, so let's talk about the rear suspension. So what I did was I went ahead and took off this lower spring bucket. I disassembled it from here first. And then there's another bolt back here that connects. See if I can get you some light. That connects the sway bar right here. Let me get the camera over to there. There's a bolt that goes through that connects it to the spring bucket and the sway bar. Okay, now I unbolted it back here and obviously up front. And the reason why I did that was, as you can see, now this bucket is very much flexible, okay? Now this is probably the most important part for setting up the rears. Let me grab the spring and the collars, okay? Now the way that this is gonna sit in here, and I tried this a couple different ways, okay? So I find that ideally, for ease purposes, you probably want to get it mounted up top, so you have access to the rings at any time. But the way that the spring is designed, the smaller end actually sits up top. Okay, so your whole locking mechanism is actually going to sit down in the spring bucket. Not ideal, I know, obviously, because if you wanted to go and adjust it on the fly, you can't. You need to pop the spring bucket down, do what you need to do, adjust the height of this, put your assembly back, and then go ahead and throw it back into the car, and then bolt everything back up, okay? Keep in mind that I am using the stock rubbers for this purpose. I didn't put it back, but that will sit up top like so. And then everything gets bolted back into place. Now, let's talk about the height. Because with these Truhart coilovers, these things can go very low, very, very low, to the point of where the car is undrivable, okay? So what I would recommend is when you guys are starting out with the rear, I would at the very minimum start it with these sitting in the middle, okay? This needs to come up more. As you can see, it's probably showing about 4 threads. You want it to be, like I said, in the middle, just to start off with, because if you drop it just like that, and I'm on 20-inch wheels, okay? So if you drop it just like that, your rim is gonna be touching the edge of your fender, okay? And I know you guys wanna drive it, you want it to look cool. It's just my suggestion. You can start it wherever you want. If you start it all the way at the bottom, don't expect to drive your car. Start it off with 50%, adjust from there. And with the fronts, you definitely want to try to adjust accordingly, because again, this has a lot of adjustability in this. Now, if we take a look at this spring versus a lowering spring, this is about half the size of the lowering spring. Okay, so that gives you an idea. Now, all of your height is only coming from this. It is not coming from the strut. Even though this has adjustability, this is strictly only for the dampening portion of it, okay? And the reason why there's adjustability on this is once you dial in your height with the lowering spring, then you wanna be able to adjust this to just bolt in nice and easy. And I'm gonna give you guys an example of that. So I'm gonna set you guys up on the tripod, I'm gonna bolt this in, and then I'm gonna show you how to adjust this. Okay, so let's get to it. All right, guys, so here's what I recommend for the strut assembly. Now, we assembled this on the bench earlier. It does have the stock Honda mounting piece. That seems to be some sort of dirt or mud. Now, what I would recommend is start with this top piece first, okay? So we are going to bolt this in, and then once it's bolted in, then we are gonna get down to the adjustability of this. Okay, now all we want to do is once this is bolted in, is we just want to screw this down far enough to where it just hooks back into place. And I'll show you guys what that little hook looks like. Let me get this kind of bolted into place, and then I'm going to show you guys the back side of it. We don't want to go all the way tight on one side. We want to do 50-50 and then just start to inch by inch, go to each side so that you don't apply too much torque to one and cross thread. Because if you cross thread these, now you're having a bad day. All right, guys, so this is the back side of the knuckle. Notice that it has this lip that is intended for this to sit on. This little lip here supports all the way to the strut. Now, we've already bolted it in up top, and you'll see right here that it is too short to get down to where it needs to be. Now obviously the only thing that you're gonna do is continue to screw down the assembly until it slides right on. That's why there's adjustability for the strut. It's so that you can get to this point, okay? Now, if you want to, of course, you can always lift this up just a little bit just to kind of get it on there. I'm gonna do that. I'm not gonna screw it down all the way because I don't wanna jeopardize these threads going all the way down and not having enough bite. So then we're gonna go ahead and tighten this part down. You'll get your locking wrench that was supplied with this kit. Go ahead and tighten it up. Then from there, once everything is bolted on, then you're gonna go through to your individual bolts and you are going to torque everything down to spec. Okay, and again, those bolts up there. Now I'm going to supply the torque specs for this particular project. They'll be in the description, but I'm also gonna take a still picture and it'll have an arrow pointing to what you need to tighten and the specifications for it. So that's the rear. Let's go ahead and tighten everything down and we are going to put the wheels on. So this is gonna be the drive portion of the video. So we're testing out and we're just checking the viability of these Truhart Street Plus Coilovers. They are installed. I did have to adjust the height several different times. First time for me doing it, so no fault of the coilover itself, but it was quite an experience trying to learn. Now the whole process, I would say on the scale from 1 to 10, probably about a 5. If I had to add the multiple adjustments to the suspension, I'd put it up there at like an 8. But again, that's not the coilover fault. That's just my skill level with coilovers. They did everything that they were supposed to do, and now we're gonna test them out and see how they actually drive. So as I'm driving them, if I can compare them to the stock strut and the Megan Racing low range spring, I will say they are much stiffer. Now at some point, I'm going to assume just like every other coil on this planet, they are gonna break in and become softer, but they are noticeably harder compared to the low range spring. Now, for me, is this gonna work out? I would probably say for my day-to-day driving, the way that I typically use my vehicle, I carry my 6-month-old back and forth in it. It's a little stiff, so you know you can feel every single bump. The car looks good though. I mean, I'm going to show you guys some shots of it, some rolling shots, and I'm also going to show you a still picture that I took in the garage of it after I put the coilovers on it. In the corners though, definitely handles a lot better. So with the stock suspension, there was definitely some body roll. You could feel that the car definitely had understeer. With these guys, however, you don't get any of that. I mean, it's planted. So once you turn the wheel, the car goes, it sticks to the ground. I also noticed too, just doing a quick, baseline pull from a stoplight, that the suspension definitely helps out with traction. So one thing, and those of you guys that have a modified Accord, even if it's just a K-tuner, there's a lot more torque when you start to open it up. And with the stock suspension, or even with the lowering springs, as you start to give it some gas, you start to lose traction. You get a tad bit of wheel hop. It's not a tremendous amount, but you definitely get it. With these lowering springs, you definitely don't get that. So that's a huge benefit. On top of the look, the traction that you're getting from it, the planted feel, it's definitely a huge benefit. Now, like I said, the one minor thing that could eventually go away is going to just be the overall ride. So when I first bought the Accord, one thing that I noticed about it is it definitely felt very good to drive in. The car that I used to have prior to it was a BMW 550i. It was a 2016, and it rode very well for being a BMW. this car actually is very comparable, if not almost identical to the way that car drives. And I'm talking about stock, right? So it's very, pillowy soft. When you put on the lowering springs, it definitely firms it up a little bit. It doesn't feel as pillowy soft. You can feel some of the bumps. When you put on the coilovers, though, the spring rates that you have on it, I mean, it's tight. You can feel it. The car feels bouncy. One thing that I will liken it to is back in the day, I used to have a 240SX S13 that I had Tanabe coilovers on, and that thing, I mean, it was bouncy. You could feel every single bump. If you hit a big pothole, the car would kind of bounce back and forth. And that's how this kind of feels right now. Now, will that clear up? It could. Could you soften your settings? You probably could. I just don't know, and I don't really want to play around with it too much more to kind of figure out how to dial that in. Like I said, with the way that I use my car, I'm back and forth all over town all the time. I sell real estate. I have my daughter in the car, 6 months old, and just driving her around, I felt bad just having her in the back seat, with her head bobbling around and her ricocheting all over the place. So I have to be practical about how I'm going to be using the car, going forward. Now, if it was just up to me purely off of looks, and I was single, back in the mid 2000s, I definitely would just rock these all the way, because it's not a tremendous amount of bouncing. It's not something that you can't live with. It's a little bit, you can feel it. But to me, if it was something that I didn't have to worry about, my daughter in the back, and I wasn't driving around town, putting 100, 150 miles a day on my car, I probably would just drive it, fuck it, go with it. But I got to be practical about it. I can't just drive on that hard of a suspension and it not affect, me or my daughter. So I probably will go back to my lowering springs. But if you guys are in the market for a set of Truharts, I would say roll with it. I mean, I haven't had any other coilovers that I've tested out for the 10th gen, but these are not bad by any means. They do have the camber adjustment up top, so if you want to adjust your camber and you do want to tuck it down low, you definitely can do that. In the rear, your height is adjusted strictly by that string and the locking collar, by the spring and the locking collars, and then the dampening is controlled by the shock height adjustment. So there definitely are a couple of ways to do this. So with that being said, don't be hesitant to test them out. I mean, I showed you guys already. You guys can get a pretty good deal on Truhart. If you guys do an internet search, even on YouTube in general, you're going to find there are a lot of people that actually do really like the Truhart brand. So, I mean, you can kind of see me here. I'm kind of bouncing around. The road is shit, though. If I could show you guys the road, it's pretty bad. But, like I said, don't be afraid to give them a try. I'm pretty sure, guys that are running BCs or K-Sport, they definitely have some bounce to them. They're not going to be, feathery soft like the stock suspension. So if that's what you're thinking you're getting, sorry to say that's not what you're getting. But with that, this is just my take on the Truhart coilover system. If you guys have any questions or comments, of course, put them down below. We'll discuss it. You can always hit me up on my Instagram, which is JDM Dreamin'. Otherwise, this is Fahrenheit Motorsports. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully, you guys have a fantastic day.